Step away from the property. Hands where I can see them.
This is my home. What's the reason for the stop?
You fit a description. Show ID.
A description of what crime, officer?
You're being detained. Don't make this difficult.
You're detaining me without probable cause.
The patrol car slowed as it rolled past the quiet, tree-lined street. Early morning light washed over manicured lawns and silent houses, the kind of neighborhood where nothing ever seemed to happen. Officer Daniel Reeves noticed the woman near the front steps and felt a familiar irritation tighten in his chest. She stood comfortably, keys in hand, moving with the unhurried confidence of someone who belonged. Reeves stopped the car. He stepped out first, voice sharp, command already loaded into it. Step away from the property. Hands where I can see them. The woman turned slowly. No panic. No surprise. Just calm. This is my home, she said evenly. What's the reason for the stop? Reeves closed the distance instead of answering. You fit a description. Show ID. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't flinch. A description of what crime, officer? His jaw tightened. The question annoyed him. You're being detained. Don't make this difficult. The woman studied him for a moment, then spoke with quiet precision. You're detaining me without probable cause. Reeves snapped back, louder now. I decide what's probable. The street went silent. Then she said it, controlled, unmistakable, measured. Then you should know. I'm a federal judge. Her name was Judge Eleanor Carter, 52 years old, appointed to the federal bench over a decade earlier. Before that, a federal prosecutor known for precision, restraint, and an unshakable understanding of constitutional law. She lived quietly, avoided attention, and never used her title unless it mattered. This morning, it mattered, but Reeves didn't believe her. People lied, he told himself, especially when they were caught where they didn't belong. Officer Marcus Hale exited the patrol car, taking position beside his partner. Ma'am, Hale said, less aggressive but no less firm. We received reports of suspicious activity. Judge Carter raised an eyebrow. What activity, specifically? Neither officer answered. Because no report existed. Reeves had fabricated it after seeing her earlier, returning from a morning walk. A successful black woman in an affluent neighborhood had triggered something he'd never learned to question. He'd called it instinct. Training. Experience. Judge Carter folded her arms calmly. Am I being charged with a crime? Reeves stepped closer. You're being investigated. For what? For not cooperating. That's not a crime, she replied. Hale shifted uneasily. Reeves didn't. You can either show ID, Reeves said, or this gets worse. Judge Carter turned toward her front door. I'm going inside my home. Reeves followed. He crossed the threshold without permission. That was the moment everything changed. Judge Carter stopped just inside the entryway and spoke clearly, deliberately. You are entering my residence without consent or a warrant. Reeves brushed past her. We need to make sure no one else is inside. Hale followed, closing the door behind them. Judge Carter reached for her phone, not to call anyone, but to document. Reeves saw it and exploded. Put that away. Now. I'm recording, she said. That's my right. Reeves lunged and knocked the phone from her hand. It skidded across the hardwood floor. What the officers didn't know, what they couldn't see, was that every angle of the entryway, the living room, the hallway, was already recording. Audio, video, cloud-backed, automatic. Judge Carter didn't raise her voice. Please provide your badge numbers and supervisor. That request broke Reeves. The insults came next. Accusations, slurs, assumptions about how she really afforded the house. Claims that people like her didn't live in places like this. Hill didn't stop him. He joined in. For nearly 20 minutes, Judge Carter stood in her own home and endured it all. She documented every word, every movement, every illegal search through her belongings. When Reeves found nothing, because there was nothing, he turned back toward her. If I see you here again, he said, you're going to jail. Judge Carter walked calmly to her office. She returned holding her credentials. She placed them on the table between them. The silence that followed was absolute. Reeves went pale. Hale stepped backward. Judge Carter looked at them both. Everything you did today, she said quietly, was recorded. And this was only the beginning. Neither officer spoke. The credentials lay on the table like a live wire. Federal seal. Full name. Appointment date. Court identification number. There was no mistaking it. Judge Eleanor Carter hadn't just claimed authority, she had proven it. Officer Reeves swallowed hard. We didn't know, he said finally. Judge Carter met his eyes. That's the point. Hale tried to recover. His voice softened, suddenly polite. Judge, if there's been a misunderstanding. There hasn't, she interrupted. You entered my home without consent. You detained me without probable cause. You conducted an illegal search. And you assaulted me. Reeves shook his head quickly. No one assaulted you. You knocked my phone from my hand to prevent recording, she replied. That is interference with evidence. Silence again. Judge Carter walked to the front door and opened it. You should leave. Now. They didn't argue. They didn't threaten. They didn't posture. They walked out like men who had just realized gravity applied to them too. The patrol car pulled away faster than it arrived. Judge Carter closed the door, leaned against it for a moment, and exhaled. Her hands were steady. Her voice had never shaken. But she understood exactly what had just happened, not just to her, but what it represented. She walked to her office and sat down at her desk. Her first call wasn't to the police department. It was to the FBI. Within minutes, she was speaking directly to the Civil Rights Division. She gave a factual account. No embellishment, no emotion, just law. Names, actions, violations. And then she said the words that changed the scale of the response. I have full audio and video evidence. 2 hours later, unmarked vehicles lined the street. Special Agent Laura Mindel arrived with a technical team and a federal prosecutor. They spent hours reviewing footage. Not clips, not excerpts. Every second, every insult, every step taken illegally inside the home of a sitting federal judge. The prosecutor stopped the video several times, not because he needed clarification, but because he needed air. This is one of the cleanest civil rights cases I've ever seen, he said quietly. Meanwhile, at the precinct, Reeves and Hale were unraveling. Reeves paced the locker room, replaying every moment. Hale sat staring at his phone, reading about Judge Carter's career. Federal bench. Prior prosecutions. Judicial Oversight Authority. She sentences cops, Hale whispered. Reeves said nothing. By the next morning, both officers were suspended without pay. Body cam footage was seized. Internal Affairs locked down their records. And those records told a story. Complaints. Patterns. Stops that never resulted in charges. Searches that found nothing. Reports that disappeared. By the end of the week, the footage was released. The nation watched. 23 uninterrupted minutes of authority abused. Rights violated. Racism spoken without shame. Legal analysts called it indefensible. Former officers called it criminal. Civil rights attorneys called it a gift, because cases like this almost never came with proof this clear. The police chief held a press conference, his voice tight, promising accountability. No one believed him. Then the FBI expanded the investigation. Not just Reeves. Not just Hale. The department. Arrest data. Training materials. Supervisor emails. Complaint handling procedures. The numbers were impossible to ignore. Black residents in affluent neighborhoods were stopped at rates exponentially higher than their white counterparts. Complaints were dismissed at record speed. Officers with repeated allegations were reassigned instead of disciplined. Judge Carter returned to the bench the following Monday. She said nothing publicly. She didn't need to. 3 weeks later, a federal grand jury convened. The deliberation didn't last long. Indictments followed. 7 charges for Reeves. 6 for Hale. Civil rights violations under color of law. Illegal search and seizure. Criminal trespass. Evidence interference. Conspiracy. Each carried serious prison time. When the indictments were unsealed, the city went silent. Because everyone understood what was coming next. And no one, not the officers, not the department, not the city, could stop it. The arrests happened quietly. No sirens. No spectacle. Federal agents arrived early, when the precinct was barely awake. Officer Daniel Reeves was handcuffed in the same hallway where he once barked orders. Officer Marcus Hale followed minutes later, eyes fixed on the floor. By noon, the story was everywhere. A federal judge racially profiled outside her own home. Illegal detention. Illegal search. Recorded in full. News panels ran the footage without commentary. They didn't need to say anything. The evidence spoke for itself. Judge Carter was asked to appear on camera. She declined. Instead, she testified. Behind closed doors, she walked federal investigators through every moment, every violation, every decision she made to remain calm and let the officers reveal themselves. She explained why she hadn't identified herself immediately. I needed to know how they treated someone they believed had no power. What emerged next changed the case from shocking to historic. Dozens of people came forward. Professionals, doctors, engineers, business owners, residents who lived in the same neighborhoods Reeves and Hale patrolled. Different faces. Same story. Stopped for not belonging. Asked to prove ownership of their homes. Questioned without cause. Searched without justification. Many had filed complaints. None had gone anywhere. Federal prosecutors began stacking evidence, not just against two officers, but against the system that protected them. Supervisors who dismissed patterns. Commanders who ignored data. Training officers who used coded language to justify profiling. Emails surfaced. Phrases like out of place and wrong fit for the area. One message from a lieutenant froze the room when it was read aloud. Use your discretion. We don't want problems from people who don't look like they belong. The Department of Justice stepped in. A full federal oversight review was launched. Subpoenas followed. Internal communications were seized. 5 years of departmental history was laid bare. The city's insurance carrier canceled coverage overnight. City Hall panicked. The mayor called emergency meetings. Budget analysts warned of bankruptcy if civil suits followed criminal convictions. They would. Judge Carter filed first. A federal civil rights lawsuit seeking damages not just for herself, but naming the city for systemic failure. Her legal team was relentless, experienced, and patient, but money wasn't her focus. Change was. The criminal trial began 6 months later. The courtroom was packed every day. Prosecutors didn't overcomplicate their case. They played the footage, full length. No edits. No narration. Just reality. Jurors watched Reeves fabricate authority. Watched Hale assist. Heard the slurs. Saw the illegal search. Judge Carter took the stand. She spoke calmly. Professionally. She explained the law, not as a victim, but as someone who had enforced it for decades. I knew exactly what my rights were, she said. And I knew exactly when they were violated. Defense attorneys tried to reframe the encounter as confusion. Mistake. Poor judgment. The footage destroyed those arguments. Former officers testified next. They described a culture where complaints were discouraged and profiling was normalized, where stopping the wrong people in the right neighborhoods was praised. The jury deliberated for less than a day. Guilty on all counts. Reeves faced over 20 years. Hale faced nearly the same. Sentencing came later. The judge didn't raise his voice. These were not errors, he said. They were choices. Reeves received 15 years in federal prison. Hale received 12. No parole. The courtroom remained silent. Outside, people cried, not in anger, but in relief. The civil case settled weeks later. $12 million. Federal oversight. Mandatory body cameras. Civilian review board with real authority. Judge Carter accepted none of the money personally. She directed it toward reform. Today, that department operates under constant federal review. Training is rewritten. Oversight is external. Complaints are investigated by civilians, not officers. Judge Carter still serves on the bench. But she is remembered for something else now. She proved that evidence matters. That authority doesn't excuse abuse. And that sometimes justice arrives only when someone refuses to stay silent. The sentencing sent shockwaves far beyond the city. 15 years. 12 years. Federal time. Law enforcement unions called it excessive. Civil rights organizations called it overdue. Legal scholars called it a turning point, the rare moment when accountability wasn't symbolic, but absolute. Inside federal prison, Daniel Reeves learned quickly what his badge no longer protected him from. He was transferred twice in his first month after other inmates recognized his name. Protective custody became permanent. Isolation replaced authority. Marcus Hale followed the same path. Their families disappeared from public view. Careers evaporated. Pensions were stripped. Appeals failed. But the consequences didn't stop with them. Under federal oversight, investigators uncovered what years of complaints never had, because no one had wanted to look. Supervisors had discouraged reports. Internal affairs had downgraded allegations. Training materials taught officers to associate race with suspicion without ever using the word. 3 command staff members resigned within weeks. The police chief stepped down before he could be fired. The mayor followed months later when the financial fallout became unavoidable. Civil lawsuits flooded in. 43 documented victims. $38 million in additional settlements. Entire city departments were gutted to cover the cost. And still, Judge Carter pressed forward. She accepted a new role, not as a judge, but as chair of the Civilian Oversight Board created under the settlement. For the first time, residents could file complaints that didn't vanish into the same system being accused. Body cameras became mandatory. Stops required documented probable cause. Supervisors were held personally accountable for patterns they ignored. Training changed too. Officers were required to study constitutional violations, not hypotheticals, but real footage, including Judge Carter's. Recruits watched it in silence. No commentary, no justification, just consequences. 3 years later, Judge Carter was invited to speak at the FBI Academy. She didn't lecture. She didn't moralize. She said one sentence. The law only works when those sworn to enforce it are willing to be bound by it. Her case is now taught in law schools, studied in police academies, cited in federal rulings. Not because she was a judge, but because she documented the truth. 2 officers believed they could intimidate someone they thought was powerless. They were wrong. Justice didn't arrive quickly. It arrived completely. Years passed, but the impact of that morning never faded. Inside the Reform Department, everything felt different. Officers spoke more carefully. Reports were reviewed line by line. Supervisors understood that ignoring patterns now carried consequences equal to creating them. Some veterans retired early rather than adapt. Others stayed and learned, because the era of unchecked discretion was over. Recruitment changed too. The department became more diverse, not because of quotas, but because trust slowly returned. Community meetings were no longer shouting matches. Residents came armed with questions instead of fear. And at the center of it all was the precedent. The ruling in Reeves and Hale's case was cited repeatedly in civil rights litigation across the country. Prosecutors referenced it when warning departments what failure to intervene meant under federal law. You didn't have to initiate the violation anymore. Participation was enough. Silence was enough. Judge Carter continued presiding over cases involving police misconduct, but her courtroom became known for one thing: clarity. Officers were given every opportunity to explain themselves, but excuses without evidence no longer survived cross-examination. She asked one question in nearly every case: where is your probable cause? If it wasn't there, neither was mercy. Meanwhile, the Oversight Board published annual reports. Names, numbers, outcomes, discipline. Transparency became policy. National media occasionally revisited the story, not to sensationalize it, but to measure change. The same neighborhoods that once generated suspicious person calls now showed balanced stop data. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Reeves and Hale exhausted every appeal. Each was denied. Their names became shorthand in legal circles, not as martyrs, not as warnings, but as proof that color of law carried weight. Inside prison, both men faded from relevance. The authority they once wielded meant nothing. Their world shrank to concrete and routine. Judge Carter never spoke about them again. She didn't need to. Her legacy wasn't built on punishment. It was built on proof. Because the truth is simple. If this could happen to a federal judge, on her own property, without evidence, without restraint, then it was happening to countless others without cameras, without lawyers, without protection. Her case forced that reality into daylight. And daylight changed everything. The long-term effects of the case unfolded slowly, but relentlessly. Federal oversight didn't expire quietly. Each year, Justice Department monitors returned with audits that dug deep into arrest statistics, traffic stops, search justifications, and complaint resolutions. Every deviation triggered corrective action. Every trend had to be explained in writing. For the first time, the department was no longer evaluating itself. That alone changed behavior. Officers learned that discretion was not immunity, that authority without documentation was liability, that a badge did not override the Constitution, it bound them to it. Across the country, other departments paid attention. Civil rights attorneys began citing United States versus Reeves in filings. Training academies added the case to mandatory curricula. Prosecutors referenced it when warning officers during grand jury testimony that failure to stop misconduct was itself misconduct. The legal standard shifted. Judge Carter watched this transformation from a distance. She never sought recognition. She declined awards. She redirected speaking fees to legal aid organizations. When asked why, she gave the same answer every time. This case was never about me. Privately, though, she understood the weight of what had happened. She received letters, hundreds of them, handwritten notes from people who had been stopped, searched, humiliated, and dismissed for years. Parents thanking her for proving they weren't imagining it. Young professionals saying they no longer felt invisible. Some letters came from officers. Good officers. They wrote to say the case gave them cover to intervene. That when they spoke up now, they were listened to. That leadership could no longer pretend not to see patterns that were suddenly measurable and monitored. One letter stayed with her. An officer wrote, "For the first time, stopping someone feels like a responsibility instead of a reflex." That was the change Judge Carter had hoped for. The city eventually stabilized. New leadership took office. Budgets recovered. Insurance coverage returned, but only after strict compliance measures were written into every policy. The Civilian Oversight Board expanded its authority. Subpoena power. Independent investigators. Public disciplinary records. Other cities began replicating the model. Reform stopped being theoretical. It became procedural. And still, Judge Carter remained on the bench. She continued sentencing defendants, ruling on motions, upholding rights with the same discipline she always had. But those who appeared before her noticed something else. She listened longer. She asked sharper questions. And when law enforcement testimony conflicted with evidence, she did not hesitate. Years after the incident, during a routine suppression hearing, a young public defender cited the Reeves case. The courtroom went silent. The officer on the stand shifted uncomfortably. Judge Carter didn't react. She simply asked, "Are you familiar with that ruling, officer?" The officer nodded. "Then you understand," she said, "why your testimony must be precise." The motion was granted. Outside the courthouse, a law student recognized her and asked if the experience had changed her faith in the justice system. Judge Carter paused before answering. "My faith," she said, "was never in the system. It was in the law." That distinction became her final message. Not spoken loudly, not spoken often, but written permanently into precedent. Years later, the case was no longer referred to by the officers' names. It became known simply as the Carter ruling. Law professors used it to teach the difference between authority and legitimacy. Police academies used it to demonstrate how quickly power collapses when it detaches from law. Civil rights advocates used it as proof that accountability was possible, not inevitable, not automatic, but possible when evidence met resolve. Judge Eleanor Carter never sought to be the face of any movement. But history placed her there anyway. She continued serving on the federal bench with the same discipline she'd always had, yet her presence carried new weight. Attorneys prepared more carefully. Officers testified more cautiously. Supervisors paid attention to details they once brushed aside. Not because she was feared, because she was precise. The Civilian Oversight Board she helped build became permanent. Its reports were cited by journalists, researchers, and city planners. Patterns that once took years to surface were now visible in months. Complaints didn't vanish. They concluded, with findings, with discipline, with transparency. Other cities followed. Some quietly, some reluctantly, some only after their own crises. But the template existed now. The law had teeth. Daniel Reeves and Marcus Hale faded into obscurity behind concrete walls and locked doors. Their appeals exhausted. Their authority erased. Their names remembered only in footnotes and case law. They were no longer symbols. They were consequences. Judge Carter received one final letter that she kept in her chambers. It was from a teenager. The writer explained that his mother had been stopped repeatedly in their neighborhood when he was younger, that he grew up believing something was wrong with them, that watching the footage, seeing a federal judge treated the same way, changed how he understood the world. The letter ended with a sentence Judge Carter read more than once. "You didn't just prove they were wrong. You proved we weren't." She never replied, but she never forgot it either. On the anniversary of the incident, there was no ceremony, no statement, no interview. Judge Carter arrived at work early, reviewed her docket, and took the bench. A case involving unlawful search was first on the calendar. She listened. She reviewed the evidence. She ruled, as she always had, because justice, she believed, was not an event. It was a discipline. And discipline, applied consistently, without fear or favoritism, was how systems changed. Two officers once believed they could decide who belonged. They were catastrophically wrong. What followed didn't just end careers or send men to prison. It rewrote standards. It reset expectations. It reminded the country of a simple truth too often ignored. The law does not bend to power. Power bends to the law. And when it doesn't, there are consequences.